Hello, it's Katie. I'm going to go through a couple of weaves again for you. So this is part 2 of my wire weaves. Now these two look like quite complicated weaves. They look quite dense and quite ornate, but they're actually both very, very simple. So this one here, I'll do this one first. This is really quite a dense weave. It's nice for making like the ring shank of part if you're making rings, that sort of thing, and it's quite nice against the skin. And this one's really ornate, and I call this my feather weave. It's probably got other names elsewhere, but it makes kind of this nice feathery design. So we're going to go through those. So what we're going to need is some snips or some flush cutters, a pair of chain nose pliers, and our wire. So the wire that I'm using for demonstration is a 1mm, so you're going to need a structural wire. So that's my 1mm wire. So that's going to give me the thickness and the strength that's going to hold everything together. And then we're going to bind everything together with some 0.4mm wire. So you could use anything 0.4 and below to weave your design with. Okay, so we're going to move straight on. So I'm just going to move these out of the way. And we're going to take some of our base wires. So as I said before in my previous video, when I'm learning weaves or teaching people to learn weaves, what I tend to do is get them to make sample pieces. So we're not actually making a piece of jewellery, we're just making a sample piece so that we've got that to refer back to if we needed to. Okay, so I've just got about 10 centimetres of my 1mm wire, and I've got 3 pieces, and we want them to be as smooth as possible. So usually when it's come straight off the reel, it's usually got a little bit of a bend to it, so just spend a little bit of time just making sure your wires are as smooth as is possible. So the next thing you're going to do for this weave, so we're going to do this really dense weave here, like that one there, is we're going to take a piece of wire. Now just for your sample piece, I would take probably about 1/2 metre or 60 centimetres, that sort of thing. I've got a slightly shorter, only for the reason that I've got a tripod in front of me, and it kind of touches the tripod and makes an awful noise, so I shall try not to do that if I can help it. So to start with, also I'll just let you know this is kind of a bit of a cheats weave because it's so easy, it's unbelievable. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to encourage my wire to be in half and start a kind of arch at the top there. Then I'm going to pull this across, so these are actually crossing each other to form a loop. So I've got this loop here. I'm going to pop one of my wires inside that loop and tighten that loop onto my wire like so. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got my base wire, I've got my loop, and I can feel my loop is on the top of my wire, and my working wires, so this one at this side and this one at this side, are on each side. Then I'm going to pop each of my other wires on top at either side of that loop. Okay, so just bringing those all together. So I'm hoping the camera will focus on this. There we go. So I've got my wire that's got a loop on in the centre and my other plain wires at either side there. So from here, all we're going to do, I'm just going to slide that down a little bit. All we're going to do, this wire is always going to stay at this side, and this wire is always going to stay at this side. Okay, all we're doing is crossing over 2 wires, so 2 wires at this side, and push down towards that loop, and then the wire comes and stays at this side. I'm going to grab this second wire, pop it over 2 wires at this side, and the wire goes back to the same side. And that's all we're going to do repeatedly. So we're using 2 wires to weave, but all we're doing is crossing over 2 and then back in the same direction. So your wires never swap sides, everything stays at the same side. All you're doing is coming over 2 wires at one side and then over 2 wires at the other side. So I'm just going to build that up a little bit. This is going to give you a really, really beautiful dense weave. Now the only thing you have to be careful of when you're doing this is try not to pull too hard, because they will kind of try and bunch up against each other. So just every little section that you do, just kind of make sure that they're still running nice and parallel to each other and not trying to get on top of each other. Okay, so Just going to let that build up a tiny bit more. It builds up really quickly. The other thing you can do with this is you could do 2 wraps on each side, and that will give you an exact identical look on the top to your 2 in 2 weave that we did in the previous demonstration of wire weaves. I will pop that link to that video at the top there. So just build that up a little bit like so, and I'll bring that up to the camera. Make sure you're squishing them together to make it nice and dense. But there you go, it builds up really quickly. You can make, if you did a bracelet length of this, you could make a whole bracelet in that and it would look absolutely beautiful. So all you need to do is make sure that you've got a long piece of wire at each side. Now you could add in with this as well, because all you need is that loop to start. So you would finish it off, so I'm going to show you how to finish it off in a second, and you would just finish it off with 1 wrap each and then add a loop. So you'd have a very slight difference in there, but I think you could definitely get away with just adding in there. But if you are going to make a bracelet length, just work with as long a piece of wire as you possibly could. So I'm just going to move on to this piece that I showed you earlier. So this is a slightly longer piece, so you can see it's really built up there. So to finish off, both my wires are underneath here, and I'm going to take the one at the bottom first. So if you turn it over, you'll see the one at the bottom. So we're going to bring that one underneath, and we're just going to wrap that centre wire 1, 2 times. So I've got 2 wraps on that central wire with that first weaving wire, and I'm going to snip off, and making sure I nip in any ends, so give it a nice squish on those ends there. And then I'm going to take the second wire and do the same. So we're always finishing on 1 wire with 2 wraps, and the wire with this wrap to finish on is the central wire. And then you'll have something very similar. You'll have an extra couple of wraps to the other end, but it will be very similar to the opposite end. And give that a nice squish. So that is how that one's finished off. So if I bring that up, you can see those wraps on that central wire there, which are quite discreet. You can't see them that much, but that's how we finish it off and make sure it's nice and securely finished. So we're going to move on to our next wrap. So moving on to the feather weave, we're going to start with 6 base wires. So each of these base wires is about 10 centimetres long. Like I said before, I'm just doing samples at the moment, so it's not actually a piece of jewellery, it's learning the weave and then repeating that again and again until you've learned the weave and you know that you're confident in it to make a piece of jewellery. So we're going to start with 1 wire. So, and I'm going to pop under my weaving wire, and I've got my weaving wire on the reel just for ease, but if you wanted to cut a length, probably about 80 centimetres would be enough to make a nice sample piece. So I've got my 1mm on top, my 0.4 underneath, and I'm just going to create a couple of anchor wraps. 1, 2, so they're anchor wraps. They just keep everything together and nice and tight on that 1 wire, just so we've got a starting point. So now I'm going to start to add my base wires. I'm going to add my base wires, level them up with the ends, and we're going to go over 2 and then up in between those 2. And we're going to do that every time on every step up. So we're going to add a wire, over 2, in between those 2, add a wire, over 2, in between those 2, and pushing everything together and keeping everything tight. Now if that tail starts to get in your way, just kind of move it out of the way a little bit. Then we're going to add a wire, over 2, and in between those 2. Now we're coming to add the last wire, so the last wire is wire number 6, and this time I'm going to pop the wire on, and I'm going to come all the way over those 2, then I'm going to come all the way down the back, and then all the way up the front. So I've done a full circle of all 6 wires. Then I'm going to come down 2 and wrap over those top two. Okay, so now all my wires are fastened together. So I did this last, like wrapped over the last two on this side of my wraps, then I went all the way around and then wrapped over the top two at this side. Now at this point, if you want any help kind of holding your wires, you can add a little bit of tape, or you can use a ring clamp or something like that just to hold everything together. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of washi tape, and what that will do is just kind of gives you something to hold without you kind of getting that real grip situation that can sometimes make it feel like, oh, I can't let go of it. But now I know I can let go, everything's fine, and it gives you kind of something a bit softer to hold. So now we can start working down. So we've already got our two wraps, our single wrap over two wires at the top, and we're going to start dropping down a wire now. So we came in between these two wires at the top here. So now I know we need to come through this gap, which is the next one down. So I can bring my wire up through that gap. So essentially at the back we're dropping down 3 wires. So over 2 wires at the front, and then we're going to drop down to the next gap, which will be 3 wires down at the back, and push together, and then over 2 wires at the front, dropping down another 3, which is going to come up in between that first and last wire, and then over 2 wires at the front. Again, just making sure you're pushing things up, making sure it's keeping nice and tight, and then we're going to come over those last 2 wires. Now we've created our full feather. We can just finish that off by working our way to being able to start our next one, which I like to do either 4 or 5 wraps just on a single wire at the bottom. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wraps, and then I've got a nice separation between all my feathers. Okay, so I'm just going to bring that up so you can see. There we go, that's our first feather in place. So I'm going to start working on the next one. I'll do this one a little bit quicker. So I'm going to work over those first 2 wires. So over 2, not 1, 2. In between, exactly the same, but we're not adding a wire this time, they're already there. Over 2 and in between. Over 2 and in between. Over 2 and in between. Over the top 2, all the way down the back, all the way up the front, and then wrap around those top 2. From then on we're dropping down 3 wires at a time. So I'm going to come under this 4th wire up, the 3rd wire down, and over 2, drop down to the next section, and then over 2, drop down to the penultimate one, and over 2, pushing them together, just making sure it's staying nice and neat, and then we're going to wrap over those bottom 2 and push together, and then you're going to finish on your 5 single wraps on 1 wire. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's going to continue all the way along. Now if you find that your wraps are trying to separate a little bit, this is why I keep some chain nose pliers handy, and then I can kind of squeeze everything together as I go along. Don't kind of leave one and then work down here and then think, oh, I need to pop that together, because it'll spoil it sort of further down. So just every time you finish, just take a look at your feathers and make sure they're nice and together, and the more pushed together they are, the more beautiful they look. So I'll bring that again up to the camera so you can see that there. And if I bring this one in, you can see how they work along, and you can actually reverse these as well, so you can do one up, one down, just by taking the wire up the back when you've completed one. And it is a really beautiful, really effective decorative weave. So I hope you've enjoyed that demonstration. I I've got some other just wire weaving demonstrations available on my YouTube channel, Katie Parker Jewellery. And if you've enjoyed this, please do subscribe, pop me a like in the video. Also, if you want to see any other weaves, I'm going to be adding lots more in any case, but if you want, there's any specific that you want, please just let me know. And take care, I'll see you again soon.